It categorizes the trends that celebrated futurism and technology, fueled by a young generation optimistic and excited about the millennium. Beginning roughly...
Damn, they were inspiring to live the way we live right now. You know what I'm saying? They dreamed of this. What the Y2K? This is just, we're living in the rendition of the Y2K.
In 1995 and lasting until 2004, it provided almost a decade full of innovative and exciting space-inspired styles. So let's get into it and take a look at the future that could have been. Background. The beginning of the Y2K aesthetic can be credited to the fast rise of the dot-com bubble. This was a stock market bubble where massive...
Yeah, so this is where, you know, the internet was in the phase of connection. You know what I'm saying? Where you can connect from different part of the world to one internet, the network.
Growth in the use of the internet caused many investors to eagerly invest in any companies that had a .com in their name, regardless of their actual potential. This produced a sort of temporary insanity in the business world.
Pretty much giving crypto in a sense, where everybody's just investing in any form of crypto at this point. You know what I'm saying?
To get investors interested, companies often added .com to their name, even if it had nothing to do with the internet, and spent excessive amounts on promotions, such as lavish parties called .com.
I think it's also what is happening right now on AI. You know what I'm saying? AI.
Parties, or $1 million commercials before they'd even made any profit. But this insanity represented a cultural optimism towards the future of technology. At the beginning, the dot-com bubble was a key player in the economic growth of the 90s, so we celebrated technology in all visual corners of the culture. Additionally, exciting other technologies were rapidly developing and becoming commercially available, like the iMac, Windows 95, PlayStation 2, electronic music, cell phones, technological toys, graphic design programs, and special effects in film and television. This commercial explosion enhanced our love and fascination with technology, and we were also fastly approaching the new millennium.
This was like the boost in the technology. That's what changed the world, you know what I'm saying? Because prior to this, we weren't really using, we had we were in a transition to the 20th century, which was technology. Prior to that, we were using technology, but not in form of what we call the internet, right? Right now, everything is done on the internet, right? That's the technology of today. So that was the beginning of that and how that was going to affect not only art, the world, every aspect of the world was affected by this. You know what I'm saying?
Period in time that for the entire century was seen as far in the future, and for the most part, we were extremely excited. However, the Y2K aesthetic is named after the Y2K bug, which was a potential computer error predicted to occur when computers would not be able to distinguish 90s dates from 2000s.
And that was the thing that they were saying back then. It was the dot-com crash, where people were like, things where everybody was panicking because they're in their mind, they thought that information was not going to transition. For some reason, the information that we had in the 90s and stuff was not going to transition to this new millennium. For some reason, that's why they had like a big crash around that time.
And upon the millennium would fail and subsequently bring down global economies. People were legitimately terrified that the new millennium would actually be the beginning of the end of humanity. But when it passed and nothing happened, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, called Y2K the first challenge of the 21st century successfully met. And it felt like we had avoided disaster.
I don't know what people fear
about the millennium, and for a while it seemed like the future was a place of boundless possibility.
But over time, you have to understand, human beings always had this thing where the world was going to end. I don't think it just started with us. I think it's been always a thing. This is going to be the last year the world is going to, you know what I'm saying? As human beings, it's always been like that.
Kind of techno-utopianism permeated the era. The belief that technology might be able to bring us together and solve world problems. This creativity and optimism created a fascinating aesthetic that showcased the boundless potential of human imagination when it comes to technology. The future had arrived, and it was powerful, shiny, and exciting.
Damn.
Clothes.
That's pretty much that human civilization interacting with, technology and shit. This is what we're living in right now. It's crazy.
As we do in any aesthetic, we first need to look at the fashion influences so that we can understand it more deeply. The Y2K aesthetic is not the first time futuristic themes have had a dominant influence.
It's the futurists.
The 60s space age began with the launch of Sputnik in 1957, the first artificial satellite orbiting the Earth, and reached its peak with the first human moon landing in 1969, which was watched by over 500 million people around the world and was one of the defining moments of the 20th century. This interest in space led to a dominant futuristic aesthetic of the 60s.
Yeah, the
that
60s.
infiltrated many fields of culture.
You see, now I know what the Y2K is. So it's always...
shows.
And it's funny because when you look at these trends never started today. What we're doing has never started. It actually, it came from, it was rooted from something, and now it's just taking form. Each century, it has a new, each century it has a new, it remodels itself. It evolves into something new, but remaining the same. And that's what the Y2K era derives from back in the 60s. That's where it started.
And of course, fashion.
Star
Designers
Trek
began
and shit.
experimenting
Yeah.
with new shiny and synthetic materials and sleek designs of futuristic fantasies. Innovative designers like Mary Quant, André Courrèges, Pierre Cardin, and Paco Rabanne incorporated space elements and unisex uniform styles into their designs. This period of 60s fashion would heavily influence the Y2K aesthetic 30 years later. The second influence on the Y2K aesthetic was a rise in street and sportswear in the 90s, thanks mainly to hip-hop culture.
Hip-hop also
Street
emerged.
and sportswear styles are defined by their practicality and casualness that is comfortable and easy to move in. They emerged in fashion during the golden age of hip-hop in the 80s.
And that was the thing about Y2K era. It was emerging with different types of... That's how you create something new out of nothing too. You know what I'm saying? You bring in the old and you merge it with the new. And that's what they had at the time. They brought in that old 60s Star Trek type of sci-fi style, and then merging it with the hip-hop, which was the modern time at that time. And that's what created Y2K.
Popular in the 90s. Here, hip-hop artists would often incorporate street and sportswear styles into their music videos and performance attire that were often a part of their everyday lives and fundamental to their street culture. The commercial success of hip-hop during this time turned sportswear and streetwear brands into household names, and many of the trends into the epitome of cool. Particularly relevant to the Y2K aesthetic were baggy and loose unisex styles.
Baggy and looseness,
The
yeah.
final influence was various components of 90s and 2000s culture that influenced the aesthetic. Firstly, there was rave culture, which peaked in popularity in the 90s and early 2000s, even being the topic of movies and a Time magazine cover in 2000. Raves were all about love and unity amongst the experience of techno
And that's
music,
what...
and so their look was often a mix of functional clothing optimal for dancing and experimental styles paying homage to the futuristic techno sounds. This could often include the influence of non-Western styles, which was perfect for the Y2K aesthetic, which was optimistic that future globalization would bring unity and a merging of all cultures.
Emerging of all cultures. And that's what I love about the Y2K, because actually that was really like the goal of it. You can see by the style, it was emerging different cultures, right? It was that first actual trend where it didn't matter where you were from. It was that first trend where you can like hip hop, or you can like rock, or you can like punk, but you had a same similarity of style that you can resonate from, because it was emerging from different cultures,
R&B, boy bands, dance pop, all of these genres not only embraced the Y2K aesthetic, but helped define some of its key features. Music video director Hype Williams popularized the high-tech sets, shiny synthetic outfits, and warped fisheye perspectives. And it was also extremely common for pop music albums to feature futuristic motifs. It was things like this which helped to legitimize the aesthetic. And lastly, there was the sci-fi phenomenon The Matrix, which was released in 1999 and had a massive influence on culture, particularly fashion. The sleek leather and all-black costumes were perfect for the futuristic Y2K aesthetic, and they even inspired a Christian Dior couture show. This combination of 60s space-age trends, functional sportswear and streetwear, rave utopia, and pop cultural influences created a versatile, innovative, commercially viable, and still unique style that celebrated the idea that humans merging with technology was bound to be a futuristic utopia.
Yeah.
Fabrics and motifs. Y2K was not defined so much by specific items, but rather futuristic fabrics and motifs that dominated the aesthetic. While there are some individual items we'll be covering, essentially a Y2K look can be created with many different kinds of items, too many to put into one video, but all of them adopt these futuristic motifs that are central to the aesthetic. So let's look at the list of these. 1. Synthetic shiny materials. They are fundamental to this aesthetic. This can include patent leather, holographic and iridescent material, and metallics that are usually silver resembling metal. Shiny fabric was first used by 60s space-age designers to showcase their futuristic ideas.
It's crazy how it's
There was a synthetic
man.
fabric called Cardin, developed by Pierre Cardin, a shiny spacey rainwear collection by Mary Quant, and aluminum and chainmail dresses by Paco Rabanne. These
Damn.
textures and fabrics are synonymous with space fantasies, and Y2K took direct inspiration from this, often placing general 90s trends in these shiny fabrics.
But that was
for a
the
futuristic
best, man.
twist.
Aaliyah, TLC.
Utilitarian chic.
These people were
Clothes
the
that are fashionable
moguls
for being
of
useful and
Y2K.
practical
Like
rather than
R&B
glamorous or even attractive.
was
They were
really
usually unisex
Y2K
items
for
that were
me.
sturdy, light in fabric, and adorned with functional add-ons like.
But that also had rock too. That was so Y2K. It was just
Designers like Marc Ecko
each
and
genre
Carl
was
Sport
in its own
contributed to this
element with
trend
the
their
Y2K, and
collections
that's why I
around the
love
new
it because it
millennium,
was such a
characterized by
universal
sleek
trend.
synthetic materials
For
and
me,
durable and practical
it
silhouettes.
was emerging
However, the
different
trend again can
people,
be traced back to
different
60s
colors, different
futuristic
races,
trends, where
different
designers
backgrounds,
often
different,
visualized future fashions
you know, just
in simple
emerging
and practical
everybody
uniforms.
and
3.
expressing their own way of
Translucency.
what
Such
it
as sheer
means to live in
materials
this
that are
Y2K
sometimes
era.
layered,
Because
clear
mind
PVC
you,
material, which
they
was
didn't have
extremely popular,
social media like
and
us, so
even
they were
inflatable
just
clothing. While
also
translucent fabric was long
emerging
considered
their
scandalous for women, this
creativity
changed when
into
Missoni
this
accidentally sent
trend.
transparent items
So they
onto
were
the
not really
catwalk in
truly following a
1967.
trend. They
And
were
then the
creating
trend
their own
really took
trend.
off.
That's what makes it
Y2K's
so
love for 60s
amazing
fashion
because
might
they
be
didn't really
why
have
they
no
incorporated this
influence from
fabric,
social media.
but translucent fabric
Whereas
is
right
also seen
now,
as technologically
majority of the
advanced
trends
and therefore
stem from
futuristic.
social
During the
media,
Y2K
right?
era, many architects, digital artists, and technology companies worked with
So-
translucency because of its futuristic appeal. For example, translucent iMacs were released in 1998. They were extremely popular and likely influenced or at least complemented the fashion trend. 4. The colour palette. The Y2K aesthetic had a distinctive colour palette of white, silver, of course for space, black, dark green, and blue. The aesthetic did use all different colours of course, but these were the main players. Okay, now let's get into specific items. Pants. The cargo pant was a crucial item of the Y2K aesthetic, a utilitarian unisex style. They were comfortable, easy to move in, perfect for rave culture, and usually adorned in many zippers and pockets. They were first designed for military men in 1938 as part of their battle uniform, but it was actually the hip-hop performers in the 90s who first brought them into
Telling you,
fashion.
man, hip hop
And then
is
they
just
became massive, even appearing in Ralph Lauren's runway show of 1998. It gave way to the rise of loose-fitting pants, which were a distinctive look of the aesthetic, channeling both utilitarian and sportswear influences.
that's where you know
Taking
right
note
now a
from
lot
the
of people are
synthetic
wearing
shiny
baggy
fabric
jeans too
motif,
because
silver metallic
we're
pants
just used to
resembling
these
space
loose
were
pants right
extremely
now.
popular and were considered both
So
futuristic and
it's
fashionable.
interesting.
Leather and patent leather pants were also a big part of this aesthetic. While the leather pant trend I covered in the McBling video was more about rebellion and rock and roll, the Y2K leather pant was more about a futuristic uniform. They were usually monochromatic and part of an all-leather ensemble that resembled a sleek space super agent. In fact, there was also a rise in the leather pantsuit,
David
which has
Beckham.
been a sexualized fashion item since the 60s, but it's also associated with extreme sports, female superheroes, female supervillains, and female adventurers. The style is therefore not only a sexualized item for the Y2K era, but a
Empowerment.
nod to the space super agent imagery they were trying to create. And they also created this imagery through full leather dress ensembles. Jackets. Y2K jackets were a mix of highly stylized items and casual silhouettes with a futuristic twist. Leather or patent leather long jackets were the most iconic. They were of course straight from the popularity of The Matrix, where characters like Neo and Trinity enter the Matrix and are transformed into all-leather ensembles. They were therefore perfect for the Y2K aesthetic's own symbolic entrance into the future. Windbreakers, coach jackets, and puffer jackets were other essential items to the aesthetic. They were mostly introduced to fashion through hip-hop as streetwear and sportswear items, often suiting the cold climates hip-hop came from. Indeed, all three of these items were originally designed to withstand cold weather, making them practical and utilitarian. They also have some The puffer jacket was similar to the space jacket,
the Y2K
also
icon.
sometimes seen in the
She was one of the
aesthetic in
Y2K
very memorable
icons.
style moments. And in the 60s, NASA actually commissioned futuristic designer Pierre Cardin to design their spacesuit. Meanwhile, the windbreaker was known as a futuristic raincoat in the 60s that could compact into a high-tech utilitarian package. Tops. Body-tight t-shirts were considered part of the Y2K futuristic uniform, and were mostly seen on boy bands. They were often in textured fabrics like neoprene or wetsuit, and tucked into large pants like cargo pants, which made them look like a military t-shirt and cargo pant combo. But it was also similar
Back
to
when boy bands were boy bands, man. We don't even have those no more. We don't even have bands no more, no groups no more. It's crazy, man.
Then there were high-neck tank
That was
tops, which were
also showing
historically
unity. Like,
associated
together
with
we
military
make
fashion.
good
They were an
music together, you know?
popular silhouette of the Y2K era, being durable, simple, and utilitarian.
I hope we get back to those
Vests
times.
also became an important utilitarian style of Y2K, usually a nylon or a synthetic material and styled as cargo, plain, puffer, or hooded. And on a side note, many other hooded silhouettes were popular too. The cargo style was utilitarian, being similar to nylon military vests and body armor, while the puffer style came from the puffer jacket trend. And the hooded style was also a nod to practicality and historical associations with sportswear. Midriff revealing tops, such as crop tops and bras, were often worn throughout the aesthetic in many different ways. As described in the McBling video, underwear as outerwear and crop tops are essentially celebrations of female liberation. But unlike McBling, in the Y2K aesthetic, they were more utilitarian, often paired with baggy cargo pants, giving the aesthetic more of a sportswear look, especially when sports bras were included. TLC and Aaliyah first made this popular as an alternative to typical body-hugging feminine trends.
Icons.
Dresses and skirts. The mini hemline played a big part in this aesthetic. I've already covered their history with feminine liberation in the McBling video, but their history with 60s futuristic fashion is a whole different thing. Prior to Mary Quant bringing the miniskirt to mainstream fashion in the 60s, short skirts had already been worn by 1950s sci-fi characters, who then went on to be a major inspiration in 60s futuristic fashion. The Y2K mini hemline was seen in both skirts and dresses, and celebrated the 60s futuristic influence on its era, creating sci-fi heroine silhouettes. On the other side of the spectrum, long skirts were just as popular a trend. Long skirts were made Y2K futuristic through lightweight, synthetic, and sometimes shiny fabrics, or utilitarian cargo style with pockets and zips. But there was also the skirt over loose pants trend, which was a strong indicator of futuristic and non-Western influences on the aesthetic. Skirts were styled in various ways over loose pants, including plain miniskirts, or the skirt was in a slit style resembling pleats. The skirt in a slit style was reminiscent of ancient Japanese skirts, such as the kusazuri, a style of pleats worn as armor by 12th century samurai warriors. And this association with Eastern styles symbolized the influence of non-Western trends on the aesthetic. Cyborg imagery. Experimentations with cyborg imagery were a key part of the Y2K aesthetic. This was largely due to a rise in biomorphic designs and special effects technology during the era, and also utopia feelings that humanity and technology were merging. The term cyborg comes from the 60s space age, describing someone who is a mix of machine and human and can survive extraterrestrial environments. It's a lovely
Maybe I'm a cyborg, just, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I feel like one.
Which often creates dystopian science fiction worlds that include cyborgs. However, the cyborg imagery in Y2K was more sleek and optimistic, likely due to a cultural excitement towards technological advancement. Things like space superhero silhouettes, alien-inspired looks, and tech-savvy styles. Assisting with this look was the fact that wearable technology boomed during the era and caused a lot of excitement. For example, the first smartwatch was released in 1998. The company Zybernaut released the first wearable computers called Pomas, and Philips collaborated with Levi's in 2000 to create a jacket with a built-in MP3 player.
Longevity, man.
It's also interesting to note that cyborg imagery was often seen in high fashion throughout the era too, which shows just how pervasive it was.
Longevity. longevity.
Accessories. Bags. Translucent and often inflatable backpacks were an iconic Y2K design. The rise in popularity of translucent material that gave a technologically advanced and futuristic look was definitely responsible for this, and the bag also reflected a broader Y2K trend of inflatable furniture. They were inspired by the 60s space age, where inflatable furniture became a trendy part of space age creativity. Avant-garde architecture created inflatable futuristic designs, and the first mass-produced inflatable chair was created in 1967. And then inflatable furniture structures became a fixation of designers throughout the 60s.
Would I put an inflatable bed and furniture in my house?
Backpacks with strong sci-fi aesthetics were also a big part of Y2K.
I love to experiment
One example being
too.
the Bobbly Megalopolis backpack, which was created as an extra sturdy, highly functional, spacious, and protective design. While it was made for outdoor enthusiasts, the high-tech utilitarian and futuristic design suited the Y2K aesthetic perfectly, and it even appeared in Macy Gray's futuristic utopian Do Something music video.
Okay.
And finally, there was a rise in utilitarian-style bags. Nylon and Velcro messenger bags.
Yeah, now we got them side bags.
The video being a super spacious and functional design for workers. Small utility pouches were also popular.
It was just being practical, man. I think the Y2K also were emerging practicality in their designs and clothing. That's what also made it so great as well, you know?
Worn across the body or waist, and have their history in compact military pouches that were sturdy and designed to be practical in size. So perfect for utilitarian Y2K. Sunglasses. Sunglasses of Y2K were both sleek and experimental. Embodying efficient yet imaginative futuristic designs.
Yeah.
To go along with Y2K's love of sportswear, Oakley's
that was a hard one. That was the hardest one for me.
Item. Prior to the era, Oakley eyewear was synonymous with sport shield lenses. This changed when the Oakley eye jacket was released at the beginning of the era, and became both an everyday style, action sport item, and a crucial Y2K trend, inspiring many similar styles. Another popular style was the X-Metal, especially after Tom Cruise wore them in Mission Impossible 2. Oakley's sports technology and functional styles became the personification of extreme futuristic cool.
Fashion icon.
Small oval-shaped glasses, sometimes with a minimalist metal frame, also came into style.
No, those were hard too.
The Matrix, and they were perfect for the aesthetic because of their association with sci-fi rebels, and because of their simplicity and practicality, making them pretty utilitarian and cool for their uncoolness. The small frame inspired the trend of tiny sunglasses in the era that were often in colour. And then there were goggles. They're a utilitarian item designed to protect one's eyes against extreme weather, and so we're bringing a sportswear element to Y2K. But also they were a futuristic 60s space age trend as well, through such designers as Pierre Cardin and André Cardin. The Y2K era took inspiration from this and often wore them on the head rather than on the eyes.
Yeah, it was just for a style.
Shoes. Y2K shoes revolved mostly around turning the practical fashionable, and the most quintessential shoe trends were sports sneakers.
Skechers.
Complemented the aesthetics love of sportswear and functionality over glamour. This utilitarian item was perfect for dancing rave culture.
Hopefully Skechers have a run back again, man, because it's been a while and I've been wearing Skechers.
And technological add-ons like flashing lights and built-in rollerblades and platforms.
Yo, Heelys?
Really popular in rave culture.
I don't even know if you had Heelys, but yo, if you didn't have Heelys while growing up, man.
In fact, platform shoes of all kinds were popular for Y2K. Think platform slide-ons by Steve Madden, or platform boots on the Spice Girls, who often adopted a playful space age aesthetic. They were a recreation of popular late 60s and 70s platform shoes, also known as the party shoe, and they were made for attracting attention in the developing disco scene. But the platform in Y2K had a distinctly futuristic aesthetic, seen as otherworldly and innovative. Even slightly platform sandals made their way into the aesthetic, and they were mostly hiking sandals and therefore designed to be super comfortable, practical, and functional over glamorous.
It is about being practical.
Them a perfect utilitarian garment for the aesthetic. And finally, there were tall boots, which were inevitably going to come into this aesthetic. Sci-fi heroines have long been associated with tall boots, and also André Courrèges released the go-go boot in 1964 to go along with his new space designs. The Y2K aesthetic often incorporated the go-go boot, taking direct influence from the 60s space age, and tall boots to create the sleek and powerful space agent aesthetic. Gloves and arm cuffs. Furthering the utilitarian and futuristic aesthetic, gloves and arm cuffs were a dominant trend of Y2K, even in the rave scene. The Y2K aesthetic was drawn to fingerless gloves, which were usually associated with sportswear, such as with cyclists, rollerbladers, and motorcyclists. Meanwhile, the armed cuff trend was similar to ancient armor worn on the arm, also known as the gauntlet. The armor aesthetic was celebrating the fantasy that humans could be in the space age as efficient and powerful agents. Jewelry. The Y2K aesthetic didn't place a lot of emphasis on jewelry, favouring a utilitarian style. However, there were two main accessories that added emphasis to this futuristic look. Firstly, there were chunky chokers and bracelets, which was likely inspired by 90s trends where chokers had become extremely popular, and the 60s space age where big chunky chokers helped create the futuristic aesthetic. Meanwhile, the chunky bracelet, when given a futuristic twist in its materials and combined with the chunky choker, almost resembled armor, creating the illusion of a capable and powerful space agent. Secondly, there are rubber watches. The most popular of these was the Baby G, designed for the G-Shock line by Casio, which was primarily for sports and military use. However, this watch targeted female youth through pop color palettes. The rubber design made
Was it G-Shock? I know they had a G-Shock,
combined the
but it's a
utilitarian
Baby G.
aspect of the aesthetic. And it
I
was
used to
such a
have
popular
G-Shock
item
with
that
it
rubber
too.
watches in general became an essential accessory.
Yeah, I used to have one of those.
Technological accessories. Aside from the wearable technology already discussed as part of cyborg imagery, there were other tech accessories that didn't necessarily create the cyborg aesthetic, but were a celebration of rising technology. Firstly, there were portable CD players.
CD players were one though.
First seen in the 80s, they became more sleek in design with Sony's release in 1997, and then they became extremely popular. There was also the slow rise in popularity of cell phones. They weren't nearly as popular yet as they would be in the 2000s, but interest in this technology was growing. The biggest brand of the era was Nokia, mainly because they catered to youth and fashion-orientated consumers with colourful designs.
And
For
after
the
that,
Y2K
iPhone.
aesthetic, Nokia's experimental and futuristic designs were the most popular, particularly the 3300.
So you know, we're not really the thing about fashion and trends, and we're not really creating something. We're just recreating something for it to be easier, accessible to people. We're not really truly creating something out of nothing. We're going back in time to see the stuff that we can remodel or make evolve differently and easy. Because the phone right now, you know, it's the same exact example. Nokia was hot in the early 2000s, but right now it's iPhone. You know, but the concept remains the same, is to connect with people.
And 7600. Hair and beauty. As you can probably guess, space age experimental hair and makeup defined the aesthetic. However, some general trends of the 90s were often incorporated into it too. Beginning with futuristic themed hairstyles, there was firstly short braids tied across the head, and they were likely inspired and then
Hip-hop.
probably appropriated from styles of box braids, which connect back to braids worn by women of the Bantu tribes from Namibia. Box braids were also a dominant style of black Y2K hair. There was also the style of twisted strands of hair across the head, which was experimental and came across as technologically advanced. They were likely inspired by dreadlocks, which
Of
have
course,
a broad history,
Rastas.
but mostly became popular in Western culture through the appropriation of
Rasta.
Rastafarians. Additionally, unnatural hair colours also came into the aesthetic, especially in rave culture. They created an otherworldly look and played with futuristic imaginations of what humans could look like when merging with technology.
Yeah, that's true.
Space and spiky hair buns were a crucial
Spiky
hairstyle
hair
in the
was crazy
aesthetic,
too, I'm not gonna
creating
lie.
clear symbols of sci-fi imagery and
Sci-fi.
sleek space heroines. Spiky hair silhouettes have had a long-standing association with space. Meanwhile,
Okay.
the space buns are associated with sci-fi through Princess Leia in Star Wars, whose hairstyle was supposedly inspired by early 20th century Mexican female revolutionaries. However, they were first worn by
Interesting.
Native American Hopi women.
Yes.
Another super popular bun style of the Y2K era were Bantu knots, and
Bantu
they originated
knots.
from Bantu-speaking tribes of southern and western parts of
Hip-hop.
Africa. But for the Y2K aesthetic, they were a multicultural style which probably symbolized a future where all cultures merge. Short,
Imagine.
sharp electric bobs that were extremely
That
straight
was-
helped
that's
create
the
a
goal.
futuristic look, and other experimental hairstyles resembling extraterrestrials were a big part of the aesthetic. Taken together, these styles are symbols of sci-fi imagination, space warriors, and non-Western influences. Popular trends of the 90s to 60s was also incorporated into Y2K with a futuristic twist. The aesthetic adopted the sleek and futuristic high ponytails, which were popular with mod 60s styles and sometimes space age styles too, often with very long tails. The aesthetic also brought the retro flicked out style into the future, which in the 60s was known as the bouffant flip, made popular by Mary Tyler Moore's character on The Dick Van Dyke Show, Jackie Kennedy, Sally Field on Gidget, and many other actresses too. Y2K also made pigtails futuristic. They have a long history in many cultures, but were adopted in the 60s to represent the youthful generation that were very much determining the fashion of the era. And there were also more general 90s styles that were not originally from the 60s, but were also often styled futuristically for Y2K. Shoulder-length flat iron hair with short layers on the side was often seen, sometimes with a zigzag part which had a very futuristic aesthetic, as did crimped hair, which created an advanced technological texture within the aesthetic. Additionally, 90s megatrends like butterfly clips, glitter hair, and hair jewels all became a part of the aesthetic. For masculine trends, spiked hair that was usually combined with bold blonde dye or frosted tips was very popular.
Man, if you all never watched Boy Meets World, come on, bro.
There was also curtain hair, which was popular with 90s teen
Beckham, Leonardo DiCaprio, and I don't know who that is.
Historically, the look has been a part of the Edwardian era and gangs in the early 20th century, but it exploded in the 90s, particularly in boy bands, and became a prominent look of the Y2K aesthetic when combined with other futuristic trends. For beauty, makeup often worked within the Y2K color palette and worked with shiny and iridescent motifs to emphasize the futuristic aesthetic. The most popular look of this aesthetic was frosted eyes. Think light shades of silver, blue, purple, and white. It has its history in makeup looks of the 60s and of the 70s, who often incorporated pale shimmer shadows inspired by disco balls and lights. But for the Y2K aesthetic, it was a celebration of light and cool tones associated with space. This trend was accompanied by light and cool toned skin that looked over highlighted
do they still do that now?
Videos and in makeup
I'm not sure.
commercials.
Because I know makeup changed too.
The ancient Egyptians understood that they could use sound to reduce their weight.
Then there was metallic makeup, made popular by brands like Urban Decay, who released their first line of metallic nail polishes and lipsticks in the mid-90s. The metallic shades complemented
Bro, imagine Aaliyah did a song with Britney Spears, man. That shit would have been crazy.
As metallic was a strong futuristic motif. And then there was glitter, which was a broad trend of the 90s in general, but was incorporated into the aesthetic both as eyeshadow and body glitter. It created a kind of extraterrestrial illusion, and was a big part of rave culture. Rhinestones also played a big part in Y2K makeup, creating an ethereal sort of aesthetic to suit the futuristic look. They were also used to create beauty looks outside of the Western world, which were inspired by Y2K's utopian fantasy of this merging of all cultures. This included the appropriation of bindis, which are often worn for important religious significance, particularly amongst Hindus, and is often considered a representation of concealed wisdom and higher consciousness. This would have resonated with the aesthetic inspired by the open-ended possibilities of human minds in the future.
Consciousness too.
Many styles of tribal makeup was also worn, and these are very general tribal styles and therefore hard to pinpoint any exact areas of influences, but tribal makeup has meant many different things to indigenous groups and tribes of the world for centuries, often being used in sacred ceremonies. Goth and drag makeup styles could also be seen in the aesthetic. Goth makeup usually features bold shapes and dark colours to represent appreciations of dark themes, while drag makeup exaggerates stereotypical female features. Their creative explorations of shapes
She looks like Coco Jones.
inspired Y2K futuristic creativity. Not to mention cybergoth trends were a growing part of rave culture, and often incorporated sci-fi inspirations into their look.
That's what I'm saying. I like
And
the
of
goth
course,
too.
experimental sci-fi
Everybody had their
styles
own
of makeup
thing
channeling
when it comes to Y2K. Everybody had their own
technologically advanced
thing.
motifs were everywhere in the aesthetic. Other visual cues. Special effects and tech motifs. The emergence of competent design systems, 3D modeling software, Photoshop, After Effects, and better video editing software in the early 90s led to a rise in special effects and visual imagery that are distinctively Y2K. This included things like motion blurring and technological motifs such as barcodes, matrix digital rain, binary codes, grids, holograms, and glitch effects. Additionally, a warped perspective in visuals was prominent, especially in music videos where a fisheye lens was testing the imagination of future perspectives. And finally, all periods of technology have their own distinct CGI look based on the capability of technologies of their time. The Y2K era computer graphics were distinct with their surreal, fake, and collaged appearance. Blobs and curves. One of the design themes made possible by Y2K.
There's always, a lot of their
they deserve their
objects were
own section due to their sheer
curved.
prevalence, being seen in many areas of design, including architecture,
Like in
also known as
architecture,
blobitecture, biomorphic forms, technofonts,
even in objects too.
as in
You know
design
what I'm saying?
objects
Like
with curvy, smooth
TVs,
features, and even
just had
the
a
revival
curve
of
to it.
futuristic
It's
retro
nice.
items of the 60s like lava lamps, hanging bubble chairs, and inflatable furniture. Two key designers in this field were Faiz Jafri and Karim Rashid, whose extensive work demonstrate the curvy and sleek look of the era. Why the blob design was considered such a strong visual cue of space and the future is up for debate, but it's likely because of how different it is to typical block designs.
Yeah, it was just different.
This makes
That's
it
why.
distinctively new and celebrates
Different
the
dude
possibilities of
perspective.
technology and design.
Yeah, we're just having fun with it, and that's what we're missing. We're just missing having fun with things anymore. I feel like that's what we became in this generation. We're not having fun with it. We're just being so structured and so lame. Did you know that majority of they said we're gonna only have 60% of color, meaning that a lot of your favorite stores are gonna reduce the amount of color that they put in everything. When it comes to the logos, the way their store looks is going to be colorless. It's going to be like more of a space gray. If you look at the cars are, a lot of cars now are just black and gray. You know what I'm saying? So that too shows you that we're moving, leaning towards such a grim, depressing, dark era. You feel me?
Millennium. The Y2K aesthetic slowly
with no
began
color.
declining. The celebration of the turn of the century was overshadowed by a contentious 2000 presidential election, September 11, and the subsequent announcement of the Iraq War. Additionally, the dot-com stock market bubble began to burst, as internet companies who did not have a business plan, good product, or track record of profits quickly went into bankruptcy, and this caused a massive decline in economic activity across developed countries. The beginning of the millennium was a rough one. Even though we had survived the threat of the Y2K bug, we seemed to be further and further away from the utopia the Y2K aesthetic was celebrating. Which brings me to a flaw I can see within this aesthetic. Fantasies and mythologies of the future and outer space have occurred throughout history and have an endless appeal to our imagination.
Yeah.
For the most part, this is harmless. But it's also easy to see how this fantasy could be taken too far. After studying the Y2K aesthetic, I get the feeling that the utopian feeling about technology was a bit of an escape from reality, a way to ignore some very real and very serious problems. I found
but that's just and that but that's just that will never change. That will never change. The one thing I don't understand about human beings, we try to escape our problems. And that's always going to remain the same, regardless of what era and what generation we're in. It's never going to have a utopic world where everybody's problem is going to be resolved. And no, that's never going to happen. It's the balance of life. So I do believe people need that form of escaping if it's helping them be productive and helping them keep going. But I don't expect people to not escape from life. That's just life.
Uncomfortable because this doesn't feel very far off how we interact with technology today.
It's the same thing.
We often use it to disassociate or numb us from reality. It's concerning.
I feel like more so it's worse right now than back then because of the technology has just really morphed us in this reality. We live in two different realities. Some people live on the internet. Majority of people are starting to live on the internet now more than ever. So our judgment affects our judgment, our creativity, affects everything. Every aspect of our life are affected right now at this moment in time. So, and I don't see that changing, to be honest.
I think that this hasn't really changed in 23 years, and in fact it may have even gotten worse.
Yeah.
However, you can definitely engage with the Y2K aesthetic and not use it as a means to escape, but rather as a celebration of human innovation. Similar to other futuristic aesthetics, it was an exploration of how humans interact with the unknown, what lies beyond time and space. The Y2K generation took this exploration to great heights, and in my opinion, it's one of the most creative and interesting aesthetics of the 21st century. What do you think of the Y2K aesthetic?
Yeah, man, that was a good show. Follow aesthetic explained. But yeah, I really do want to chime in on that, and I do want to say that I love it. The reason why I love it is because people were still authentic. Yeah, a lot of people were authentic. They were themselves. They were truly themselves, and just the way they were living in that moment of just being present. Because they didn't have the technology that we have right now. A lot of people were a lot more social. So I love it for that aspect. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we're lacking right now. I think it have gotten worse. You know, we are more in a really truly depressed, lonely, soulless society. And I'm actually going to. I really want to know what type of trends is going to come from that. You feel me? But yeah, man, it's been real. Thank y'all for watching another Roman Collage show edition. Feel free to like, subscribe to my channel. Peace. I'm out.